Do you know what time it is? It's Supernatural Storytime. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The Thing in the Backyard. I moved from Arizona to a small town in New Mexico called Edgewood when my parents had gotten a divorce when I was 3 years old. Our house had a mountain along the side of it. Growing up there, I liked it. Running up the mountain during the day made me feel close to it on some sort of level, but that closeness changed when I was in middle school. It was the summer of 2012, and I had invited my best friend Grace and her mother over, for they were close friends. Grace and I were always laughing about anything when we got together. On that day, we ended up spending most of our time on my trampoline that is diagonal to the right front corner of my house. It started to get late in the day, and when it is dark, the trees of the forest get very dark, almost black. But the stars are always beautiful, making me not scared to be outside at night. About 8 or 9 p.m., my mother turned on the porch light, and she spoke to us, announcing that her boyfriend would be coming over soon and for us not to freak out when a truck pulled up. This gave us the brilliant idea to scare him. We planned to hide under the trampoline in the tall weeds and jump out when he exited the truck. Unfortunately, our plan failed, for we again began laughing hysterically at something we had said, causing us to be found out. After calling out from under the trampoline, we were planning on going inside to see what our mothers were doing. I was stopped from my path when I heard Grace say, "Did you hear that?" I stayed quiet and listened for a moment, but failed to hear anything. I assumed she had heard neighbors fighting or dogs barking, which I had grown accustomed to over the years because everyone there is loud and has guard dogs. I then told her, "I don't hear anything. What did you hear?" "It sounded like a twig snapping." Upon hearing this, I still didn't think anything of it. I logically thought that it could be a bird or a rabbit because we don't have big animals where I live. But Grace didn't know that. As a joke, I wanted to scare her. So I said in a sarcastic ghost voice, "Ooh, it's a bear." And that's when I heard the snapping noise. It was too loud for a twig, but too quiet for a tree branch. She then tried telling me again. There, the twig snapping noise again. Still trying to play off my joke, I continued, saying it was a bear, and the snap came again. This time, I knew it came from my backyard area. But I knew there was nothing in my backyard. The things that were back there were an old goat fence that took up most of the space, the propane tank, our gray shed that is up against the house, and the electric pole. Now, my house has an uncompleted fence separate from the goat fencing. The uncompleted fence only cuts off our view of our right neighbors. There is nothing in the back grass area, and any little animal like a rabbit can walk into our yard from the mountain. Remembering all this, I knew the noise was nothing to worry about, but I could tell Grace was somewhat scared, so I wanted to reassure her. "Want to check it out?" "Yeah." And with a response, we went inside my house to get an electric lantern since I couldn't find a flashlight, while Grace grabbed a broomstick pole. We set out on our little journey to the backyard. Now, the lantern is pretty ghetto and only shows light about a yard around, and it isn't very bright. While walking along the right side of my house, Grace asked me, "What do you think it is?" "It's going to be a bear." We laughed in those short seconds, but our laughing came to a sudden stop when we reached the back corner of my house. It was something I had never seen before, and I kept thinking there is nothing in this world that can be that tall. Yet I was too scared to look away. Everything was so quiet, and we could only hear our mothers laughing through the wall of the house, but we couldn't move our eyes away. Now, remember how I described my backyard? Well, my house, it's maybe 12 feet tall. Our gray shed is about 10 feet high, and the electric pole, which is parallel to the shed, is probably 16 feet tall. These are guesses on height, but this thing that stood in front of us was as tall as my house, but not as tall as the electric pole. It was pitch black, and even with the dark forest trees that were behind it, this thing was blacker than the forest. It was standing between the shed and the pole, with maybe 25 feet from us and maybe 15 feet from the tree line. To me, it looked like a Grim Reaper. How they have that black cloak on? I remember its oval head shape on its broad shoulders that reminded me of a man's, but looking down to where its legs should be, I saw nothing but black that blended in with the night. I was too scared to look away from where its face should be, even though it was all black. It made no noise and no movement. I had a feeling as though I had caught in the act of something and it didn't know what to do. Without taking my eyes off of it, I whispered, "Grace, do you see that?" I wasn't sure how long we had been staring at it. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. I heard her hushed "yeah" response. With that, I nodded while continuing to not take my eyes off this thing in front of us. Good. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. Silence again filled the air for maybe 30 seconds. I think we were both too afraid to move or look away from this thing because it had long legs for its tall body. It could easily take 3 lunges and reach us. What should we do? Grace asked me and my brain was screaming, "Run!" I didn't have a plan, but it all happened so fast. I barely slid my right foot forward like an inch, and I heard the loud twig snapping sound, and I screamed, "Run!" We both could only scream, "Ah!" as we turned and bolted to the front of the house. We rounded the house, onto the porch, up the stairs, and through the front door. Once inside, we continued to run and scream. I remember the looks on our mother's faces, thinking we were insane, as my mother asked, "What's wrong?" Without letting our screams stop, we were somehow thinking the same thing, to look in the backyard through the back window of the kitchen. We communicated with no words, just continued to scream and point. I was trying to tell her to pull up the blinds of the window, and she nodded like she understood, while I ran the back room and turned on the backyard lights. When I hit those 2 switches was when our screams stopped. I listened for a second and then asked loudly, "Is it there?" I waited for a response, and then Grace said, somewhat in disbelief, "No, there's a barrel." I walked out of the back room and looked outside the window. There were no footsteps, no twigs or branches, just a rusted old metal barrel that I had never seen before, placed exactly between the shed and the electric pole, right where we saw the figure standing. Even though I made sure Grace told me she saw it too, we both knew that people would just call us crazy like our mothers did. I decided to tell my older cousin, who at the time was living with us. He had an interest in demons and things alike. Waiting for him to laugh when I was done telling him, I was shocked to hear his response, which was, "Yeah, I've seen it too." He spoke as if it was no big deal, but to me it was. He had told me that he had woken up from a nightmare one night and happened to look out the window in his room. He had no blinds, but he saw something black and round like a head shaking in the top right corner of the window. When he looked at it, though, it stopped moving and then slowly backed away from the window and was gone. I asked him if we were crazy, and he told me no, and that we weren't the only ones that had seen it. According to him, one of our neighbor's son that was friends with my cousin had also seen it after he purchased a necromancer book. Over the years, I learned that a few people have seen it too. From their information, I gathered that it likes to watch, as if it just stands in our yards to consider our houses and observe, like it is curious. My cousin told me he was afraid of it coming into the house, so he placed a barrier around our house so it can't enter. Though none of us know what it is or what it's called, but I always remember its broad shoulders that stuck out that reminded me of a man's shoulder. I decided to give it a temporary name, since I thought it rude to continue to call it it, so I called it him. I'm not sure if it's a male or if it even has a gender, but everyone who has seen it has only seen it once. For some reason, I want to see it again, but I'm very scared. So I just wait for the day to have an encounter with him again. Maybe when I least expect it. One day at twilight, I'll be in my backyard and I'll see him, and I'll have my wish come true. The townhouse. For a long time, I'd lived with my parents in a townhouse in a pretty quiet part of the neighborhood. However, we'd always been pretty unlucky and had awful neighbors. When we first moved into the apartment, the woman and teenage daughter next to us routinely sold heroin and other fascinating substances out of their house. After they moved out, the next family to live there was an incredibly loud family with an even louder, unrelenting, yappy chihuahua that I wanted to kick over the fucking fence. Those of you who are not familiar with townhouses, I'll provide some background. Essentially, it's like having a house with all the annoying disturbances of an apartment building. The only reason we've even stayed here for so long is because my dad's best friend with the owner, so we get an incredible deal on the monthly rent. A few days before I came back from college on my first summer, my old neighbors, who were probably the best yet, a middle-aged couple with a pretty cute kid, left and some new tenants moved in. I didn't really keep up or bother meeting them because I can't be bothered to meet with the neighbors unless they're either incredibly fucking annoying or park on our side of the driveway. My first night back, it was about 3 a.m., so I decided I wanted to smoke a little weed and listen to some music to have a nice relaxing night. My room happened to be the one room adjacent to the identical one in the other townhouse. So when I opened up the window for some fresh air, I could tell there was a light coming in from their window, spilling out onto the patio. Remembering it was 3 a.m., I briefly wondered what the hell they were doing up so late, but I simply decided getting high mattered far more than figuring out what my new, undoubtedly retarded neighbors were doing up at 3. I searched my backpack for my pipe and realized I'd left it in my dorm. I sighed and went downstairs to get an apple to make into a cute little piece. I jogged silently down the stairs to the kitchen, got everything I needed, and then walked back to my room. My window was closed. I stepped backwards and peeked out of my room down the hall towards my parents inquisitively, wondering if perhaps they had come in and closed it. But their room was closed with no light on, and I hadn't heard them up and about anyways. I simply shook my head and again decided I really did care more about getting high than I did about my window being closed, so I opened it again and finished off a bowl. As I disassembled the pipe and threw the apple outside, I realized the light next door was no longer on. Clearly, they were up and they hadn't just left the light on. I moved away from the window and sat down on my computer to browse the internet for a bit when the window slammed shut ungodly hard. I was high, yes, but being stoned doesn't grant you the powers to slam windows shut with your mind. I was scared. I stared at the window, and as I was sitting there, taken aback, my mom walked in the room and made me wet myself for the second consecutive time in about 4 seconds. She was pissed at first, but when she saw me in genuine shock, she was at first worried. I explained to her what happened, but her concern turned to disbelief as she dismissed me and told me to stop being a fucking goof and go to bed. It's 3 a.m. And I'm pretty sure she whispered something about me being a goddamn pothead as she wandered back to bed and closed her door. I sat there and called my dog into the room, then scratched under his neck as I contemplated what the hell actually had happened. Nothing happened for the next few weeks, so I just chalked the window up to me being an idiot somehow, or something similar to that, and pushed it out of my mind. My puppy went missing a few months later in late August. A few days after his disappearance, I was being a lazy ass sitting on my MacBook in my room while I was on the phone with my friend when I heard a smack and a noise that sounded like a tear. I jumped up like someone had pushed a tack into my ass and looked back. There was a slightly oblong-shaped hole in my screen with the edges jutting in. Initially, I thought, shit, a bird just killed itself on my screen. But then I went outside to investigate and looked for the poor bird, and something horrifying dawned on me. The important part here was that my window was closed. It was while I was outside, and it was the whole time I was in my room before I had went outside. Secondly, the window of the room adjacent to mine was open. The screen was out, and their light was on. Slightly unnerved, I went back inside up to my room just to make sure there was no bird somewhere in the blankets of my bed. This was also when I noticed the screen was now missing from my window entirely. It hadn't been ripped more than previous. It was just totally gone. Metal frame and all. My first instinct was to go over to my neighbors and kick their shit down and yell at them for stealing my screen. But I remembered being outside and seeing their window and how far away it was from mine. It just wasn't possible. I waited for my parents to get home. Downstairs, I didn't even bother explaining about what the hell had happened to them. Just awkwardly hung out with them and reluctantly slunk back upstairs when it was around time to go back to sleep. The blinds were up, and after an encounter like that, I would have rather put them down, so I walked over and looked out the window again, noticing that my neighbor's room had its lights on. I was staring at it in a trance for a few seconds when I realized someone was standing in the way of the light and casting a shadow. And that was the unnerving part. They were just standing there like a cardboard cutout. It was absolutely inhuman and quite unsettling, but not as unsettling as what happened next. The lights flickered for a fraction of a second and the person's shadow was gone. My stomach lurched. I pulled in air sharply. Nobody can move that fast. Nothing can move that fast. It was literally in a blink of an eye, just gone. I closed the blinds and slept with the door of my room locked and the lights on that night. At the end of August, my parents informed me that they were having a nice little vacation to a quiet resort a few miles out for a week. They told me as long as I kept the house standing, I could throw a party or have a good get-together. I was through the roof. I was ecstatic. They drove off and I went to pick up one of my good friends, Kate, and we decided to celebrate my temporary brand new bachelor pad with a good smoking session at around 11. We walked into the house with a few grams and some comfy clothes that we could shake off really quick. As soon as we actually entered the house, however, we both realized it was freezing. It was late August, yes, but it was absolutely disconcerting how cold it was. Kate was quick to remark on this, and by the time I had even just reached the thermostat in the living room, she was shivering and rubbing her arms, regardless of the fact I'd given her one of my thick snowboarding sweaters. Something told me the clothes might not come off as quickly as I had hoped they would. The thermostat reported simply that it was 5 degrees inside the house, which is a crock of shit because it's set to 26. I told Kate about this and she flatly remarked, "I guess your heater's fucked, man." Like punctuation on her sentence. There was an ungodly loud bang upstairs. Kate turned to me and, looking almost hurt, said, "I thought nobody was home." I was mad, and not about to let this get in the way of a good night. I decided to be tough and said something along the lines of, "If we aren't right now, we're going to be." I ran upstairs and my bookshelf had been violently thrown on the ground. The wood on it was split and books and assorted shit that was on it had been thrown various distances across the room. Kate helped me clean everything into a neat pile, and after we discussed what I should do with the trash bookshelf, I began to explain the 2 other things that had happened before she arrived. We agreed that it was definitely my neighbors, somehow getting into the house and probably using the window to distract me from them stealing my family stuff. She told me we should go to their house right now and confront them. We walked out into the darkness with whatever little light there was still, cast by street lamps and the moon. It was about 11:30. We had never started or actually even seriously contemplated started our smoking session. I walked across the driveway and noticed their car wasn't in it, and then I began to think, I've never even seen their car. I've never seen it leave. I've never seen them walk in or out of the house, except for the shadow. I haven't even seen them at all. I come to that slightly jarring conclusion and stopped in my tracks at that point, right in their driveway when it turns into the path to walk up to their doorway. Kate noticed this and turned around and asked me if I was okay. I simply said, still slightly taken aback, "Kate, I've never even seen these neighbors, never heard them. With the luck I've had with neighbors, that doesn't happen." She cutely cocked her lip to one side a bit and in a very confident voice said, "Well, now you will. It's probably a good idea to let your neighbors know that you're not okay with them coming into your house and getting all in your shit." I said, "No, I mean, like, there might not be anybody there to answer us. It might be that nobody lives there." She twisted her face into this adorable, confused look, stared at the house and back towards me, and asked me simply, "Someone has to live there. You haven't asked your parents about the neighbors even once?" I simply told her that I really don't give too much of a shit about the tenants of a building that I'm not actually living in. I'm used to people moving out because the landlord got tired of putting up with their crap. This was usually for not paying the bills or messing the place up by throwing parties every weekend. My parents had even said that they were questioned by the police on a few occasions, wondering if they'd heard any screaming or fighting next door, as someone else had called in a domestic disturbance. She mulled the thought of it over for a moment and started talking, mostly to herself. domestic violence? Well, maybe it's just whoever the fuck next door bothering the tenants until they can't stand it and move out. And now that there's nobody there, they're trying to kick you out. Hearing this snapped me out of my trance and threw me into an angry fit. Nobody kicks me out of my own house. I marched right up to the door and pounded with probably a lot more force than necessary. Nobody answered. We went to look through the front window, but the light was off, and even though the blinds were apparently non-existent, the glass was smeared with enough fingerprint grease to open a McDonald's, so we couldn't see through. We walked to the back patio and tried to look inside their back window. The window was again smudged, this time with the blinds closed, but we could tell one of the rooms had a light on. As I looked over to Kate, I saw a motion out of the corner of my eye, the door in my room opening ever so slightly. I pushed Kate gently and pointed towards it, not wanting to make a sound. The door opened silently with an absolutely grating and horribly awkward slowness, as if whatever was opening it was opening the heaviest door on earth. It finally opened enough for whatever to enter the room, and when it did, we caught a glimpse of it before it locked eyes with me and let out a tremendous shriek that pierced through my core and rattled me right down to the marrow in my bones. The light inside the room exploded in a brilliant flash that Kate and I had burned into our retinas for a few minutes. After a few seconds of recovery, I looked back with tears of fear in my eyes, and the blinds to my room had been drawn. "What the fuck was that?" Kate whispered in a very distressed tone, with the most upset look on her face, and we began to discuss what we'd just seen. For a split second, I'd seen its gray, rotting skin, covered in bruises and sores, with hair drenched in something damp, sticking to its body from the moisture, like it had just emerged from a sauna. The face of the creature was horribly swollen and disfigured, not unlike the victim of a horrendous beating in which its face was permanently distorted into some horrible, disturbed version of what it once was. Kate told me that she'd noticed disgustingly yellow, decaying eyes, sunken deep into its head, with a flat, distorted pupils which completely eclipsed its iris. Kate and I stood there, loosely holding each other and shaking for what seemed to be hours, but really couldn't have been more than about 30 minutes. It was almost 1 a.m. now. Kate said in a voice not much smaller than mine, "We should call the cops. We have to. They need to search the house." Needless to say, I was in complete agreement. I called them and informed them that there was an intruder in the house who we observed from the back patio, and they showed up at around 1:20 a.m. They searched through the entire house and didn't find anything, besides the shattered glass from the light bulb strewn evenly around my room. Despite desperate pleading to search the townhouse next to me, the police told me that they would not, as there were no reasonable grounds for a search, and they would need a warrant to enter the premises. I walked into the room to discover the window was, unlike when we were outside, wide open with the blinds drawn. I tried to close the window, however, it had literally been forced open and would not budge an inch. If I had put any more force on the drawstring to close the blinds, it would have torn right off. Kate and I cleaned up the glass, which had practically turned into powder, and then collapsed on the bed holding each other. Kissing her on the forehead lightly, I told her that I was tired and out of ideas, short of going to their door and beating the goddamn thing down with a crowbar. Kate perked her head up unexpectedly and hit my jaw, practically making me bite my fucking tongue off, and said, after some apologizing, "That might actually be a good idea, baby," as she gently rubbed my chin and made me tilt my head up a bit, accepting her gentle touch. That's when I noticed it, and my skin crawled with goosebumps. "Fuck, Kate. They didn't search the attic, did they?" I asked. She replied, "I don't think so. Why?" I pointed. In the roof of my closet, there was a little hatch that led to my attic, and the tile that was supposed to be in place over the hole was not. I bolted straight up and out of bed so quickly, I bodily flung Kate off the bed. I ran downstairs and turned on every damn light I could while I was going to the garage and grabbed a crowbar, as well as a tire iron for Kate. I handed her the iron, and she asked me innocently, "Tom, are you high?" And I told her in a very serious tone, "No. Now if you would rather not be a part of this, then you can go. Sit in the car, do whatever, until I'm back." She deliberated for a few seconds and then decided she would come with me. I showed her the most devastating way to swing our iron, told her where to aim for, and told her when to just run. We went over our plan, and I grabbed a computer chair and used it to propel first Kate then myself into the attic. We looked over in the far corner, and sure as hell, there was another hole into the same attic. Wondering why the hell you would ever want to share attic space with a neighbor, I dropped back down to collect the computer chair. We were going to need it to exit the building if we did actually go in. It was nearly 2:30 now. Dragging the computer chair over the uneven slats in the attic in a fashion as not to fall through the roof, it was difficult. Doing it quietly as not to give away our little D-Day intrusion was even more impossible. We got it over, however, and then positioned it carefully and silently set it down on the floor in the room. I dropped down first and then steadied Kate as she came down. I reached out and quickly turned on the light. It was my room. The exact same layout, except it was completely, entirely empty. The only thing in it was the chair that had been recently imported. I went and opened the door to the hall a bit, but Kate whispered my name and pointed. We looked over to the window, and right in front of it was a black stain. We approached closer and noticed it was actually 2 separate spots, as well as an indent in the carpet itself, like someone had stomped around merrily in tar, then stood in the same spot for a decade. As we were investigating the stain, the door to the room slammed with a deafening crack that split through the otherwise complete and wholesome silence with an impressively intimidating air. We began to cautiously walk towards the door, and we heard someone else walking. Or how it actually sounded. How a small child might sprint and slide down the stairs, hitting every step loudly with the heels of their feet. With blood rushing through my body so hard I could hear it pumping through my ears, I opened the door, ready to smash anything on the other side with the force of 1,000 suns. We noticed the door across the hallway was open, the furthest room from my townhouse. We slowly and carefully ambled down the hallway and pushed the door back. It hit us. The smell. Many smells can be unrelenting. Many smells can be disgusting. Other smells can be completely horrendous. But only a few smells, built into a very human instinct, can trigger that reaction to vomit, of wanting to puke. Smells such as vomit itself, of blood, of rotten decay. It seemed that all of these smells permeated the master bedroom. I leaned over and with a violent lurch emptied my stomach and added to the sickening mix of scents and mystery fluid all over the floor. As we turned on the light, we were frozen by what was sitting in the middle of the room. There was a nest. A fucking nest. Seeing this so out of place in a townhouse bedroom completely pushed any thought of the horrible smell out of my mind. I might as well have had insomnia. I walked up to the nest, which was seriously a big bowl made of papier-mâché, wrapped human hair, slapped together with a completely unnatural sheen, seemingly made of blood and spit, a slick coating. I urged Kate to look closer, but she just stared aghast at the walls. Hanging were the skinned and mutilated bodies of neighborhood cats and dogs. I walked up to what appeared to be one of the fresher corpses, and with a tear in my eye, scratched under my dog's neck for the last time. Kate motioned me back over to the nest, and I noticed a few bowls with unidentifiable liquids in them. Some of them clear, some of them red, some of them black. Kate told me that these were actually skull caps from humans. The fact, out of all the things in this room, suddenly made us realize the seriousness of what we were doing, and we elected to get the fuck out of there. It was also about this time that as we re-entered my room, we noticed the computer chair was gone. The full force of just exactly how fucked we were hit us, as all the adrenaline rushed out of our bodies, and was replaced simply with pure, unadulterated fear. I don't think you would judge me if I told you that tears ran down my cheeks, as it dawned on us that we should have to go downstairs to leave the townhouse. Kate and I took some very deep breaths and walked slowly down into the absolutely paralyzing dark, fumbling for a light switch to hopefully throw the impenetrable darkness aside. Surprisingly, I found the switch, but the light it led to was so dim that it honestly made no difference. The lighting was worse. In hindsight, it would have been a stellar idea to bring my own flashlight. As I walked through the living room, I found myself stepping on an old 70s-style rug. In the incredibly low lighting, I could barely make out an overturned couch facing a wall, right near the front window and entrance hall. Trying to distinguish between black and not quite as black, I saw a figure by the front door slightly darker than the rest of all the darkness. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Kate change her stance and grip the iron harder, then quickly throw me a glance to silently tell me that she could see it too. I leaned over and said, "We should just fucking smash it right now. It's in the corner because it's and that's as far as I got." At exactly that moment, the thing jumped directly at us and unleashed an ungodly scream that still makes my skin crawl and my bones hurt when I think about it today. It was like nails scraping on a chalkboard mixed with a person's final dying scream, and broken bones scraping against broken bone, all in one sickening, terror-inspiring package. Words can't even describe it anywhere near as well as what it actually was, but that comes somewhere close. I swung. I swung with every ounce of survival I had. So did Kate. I connected somewhere in the general region of the thing's face. I could tell not only by the fact that it made a most sickening crack and squish, but also because it truthfully, felt like I shattered every bone in my hand. Like when you connect and hit a baseball really, really hard with a bat. The thing squealed and dropped to the floor in such a manner that almost made me laugh, then began to skitter away on all fours with a sound akin to a spider with paws of a dog on a slippery wooden floor. It bounded away as I sprinted toward it. It jumped directly through the front window, which shattered brilliantly and escaped into the night. Kate and I didn't waste any time getting the fuck out of there. It was just before 4 a.m. We called the police again, telling them that we had heard a large crash next door. According to the official police report, it told us that a group of dangerous vagrants had been squatting on the premises for an undetermined amount of time, which was totally fine with me. I'd rather not let them know we were essentially the cause for the crash and the broken window. I dropped Kate off at her house. We never did have our smoking session, or wind up fooling around like I had hoped we would, but after experiencing that night, I would have rather lived without that than died with it. I walked back into my room after dropping her off, and sitting on my floor was the window screen with the hole wired shut. I picked it up and inspected it closer. It was tied with one solitary thick strand of human hair. After gagging, I made a final trip that night. I drove all the way to the dump and threw the screen out. I came back and relaxed in my room and looked up at the ceiling to see one single black tar handprint. My stomach lurched and I shot upright in bed as my hair stood on end. I heard that same scream again, somewhere in the distance.